He was terrified of water. The shark didn't work. And the crew? They were falling apart. When Roy Scheider signed on for Jaws, he had no idea he was stepping into one of the most dangerous, chaotic, and groundbreaking productions in Hollywood history. The ocean was real, the blood was fake, but the fear, that was genuine. As the mechanical shark sank, tempers flared, actors clashed, and accidents piled up. What was supposed to be a simple thriller nearly became a disaster, and yet, against all odds, it made movie history. This is the untold story of Roy Scheider, the nightmare behind Jaws, and how one of the greatest films ever made nearly sank before it ever left the shore. Before he became Chief Brody, the man who would go face-to-face with the most famous shark in movie history, Roy Scheider was something else entirely. A gritty, serious actor known for bringing quiet intensity to every role he touched. Born on November 10, 1932 in Orange, New Jersey, Scheider grew up far from the glitz of Hollywood. His early years were defined not by fame, but by discipline. He studied history at Rutgers, served in the U.S. Air Force, and trained as a boxer before ever stepping in front of a camera. Acting wasn't the plan, but it found him anyway. He gravitated toward the stage, where he developed a reputation for commitment and emotional precision. In the early 1970s, his career hit a turning point. After roles in gritty dramas and crime thrillers, he earned an Academy Award nomination for his performance in The French Connection, 1971. As Detective Buddy Russo, he was magnetic, gritty, and utterly believable. Hollywood started paying attention. But Scheider wasn't interested in stardom. He was interested in the work. He turned down roles that felt hollow, focused on characters with depth, men struggling under the weight of real fear and real consequence. So when Jaws came across his desk, he hesitated. The role of Chief Martin Brody, a city cop turned beach town sheriff, didn't look like a career-defining role on paper. The script was sparse, the director was young, and the villain? A mechanical shark. But something about the character spoke to Scheider. Brody wasn't a superhero. He wasn't a monster slayer. He was just a man, afraid of water, trying to protect his family and his town. The stakes were small, but personal. That made all the difference. What Scheider couldn't have known was that Jaws would become the most grueling experience of his career, and that his quiet, grounded performance would become the heart of a film that would change cinema forever. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't looking for a franchise. He was trying to play the truth. And in doing so, Roy Scheider became something he never expected. A legend. Steven Spielberg wasn't supposed to direct Jaws. At just 26 years old, he was still an industry newcomer with only one theatrical film under his belt. But when producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown saw Duel, Spielberg's intense, made-for-TV thriller, they saw something raw and fearless. They offered him Jaws. Spielberg accepted, not knowing he was about to step into one of the most disastrous productions in film history. From the start, Spielberg made a controversial choice. He insisted the movie be shot on the open ocean. Universal Studios wanted the film contained to studio tanks or backlots. It would be safer, cheaper, and easier to control. But Spielberg had a vision. He believed a shark attack movie wouldn't work unless it felt real. Truly, terrifyingly real. That meant real water, real waves, and real chaos. What seemed visionary on paper quickly devolved into madness on location. Martha's Vineyard, a quaint island off the coast of Massachusetts, was chosen for its shallow, clear waters. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was also completely unprepared for a Hollywood blockbuster. Boats broke down, cameras were lost to the tide, lighting rigs failed under salt spray. On good days, the cast and crew spent hours waiting for the sea to calm, just enough to shoot a single scene. On bad days, they floated for hours, with no usable footage. Spielberg's insistence on realism quickly became a production nightmare, but the director refused to compromise. He believed that if audiences felt the movement of the water, the way the horizon swayed, the unpredictability of the waves, they would feel the danger in their bones. He wasn't making a movie about a shark. He was making a movie about fear. It would come at a price. The budget ballooned. The schedule collapsed. And somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Drifus started to realize they weren't just making a movie. They were surviving. In Hollywood, monsters are controlled, reliable, predictable. On the set of Jaws, the monster had other plans. Bruce, the nickname given to the 25-foot mechanical shark, after Spielberg's lawyer, was supposed to be the star. He was built in 3 parts, a left-facing version, a right-facing version, and a full-body version to glide through the water. On land, he looked impressive. In the ocean, he was a $250,000 disaster. Salt water corroded his hydraulic guts. The latex skin warped and peeled. The rig that moved him often jammed or sank entirely. Every day, the crew prayed Bruce would work. Most days, he didn't. The entire shoot came to a halt again and again. Not because of the actors or the weather, but because their killer shark was dead in the water. This mechanical failure forced Spielberg to make one of the most important creative decisions of his career. Don't show the shark. Instead, he used shadows, ripples, and John Williams' now legendary score to create the illusion of danger. A floating barrel, a screaming swimmer, the slow creeping pull of water around ankles. Audiences felt the shark long before they saw it, and that made it scarier than anyone imagined. Roy Scheider embraced the change. His character, Brody, wasn't a macho hero. He was vulnerable, terrified. The less they showed the shark, the more Scheider's performance carried the weight of the threat. His fear became our fear. But behind the scenes, Bruce's failure caused chaos. The budget doubled. The production ran over by more than 100 days. Executives panicked. Reporters began calling Jaws flaws. Spielberg feared he'd never work again. And yet, in a strange twist of fate, the monster's malfunction made the movie a masterpiece. Jaws wasn't terrifying because of what you saw, it was terrifying because of what you didn't. Filming Jaws wasn't just difficult, it was brutal. For the cast and crew, every day on the water was a test of endurance, patience, and sheer willpower. Martha's Vineyard became a sun-baked prison of floating platforms, malfunctioning equipment, and unpredictable ocean conditions. Seasickness was constant. Grip crew members vomited between takes. Camera operators wore scuba gear to rescue fallen gear from the ocean floor. Actors were hoisted between boats using cranes just to keep the swelling sea from injuring them. At one point, a camera platform flipped entirely, destroying several reels of footage. Roy Scheider, who was used to intense roles, found himself in physical distress. The heat, the salt, the endless hours of waiting, all of it wore him down. There were no trailers to retreat to, no land-based sets to take refuge in, just open water, glaring sun, and the ticking clock of an already cursed production. Then there was the boat, the Orca. Designed to look like a battered old fishing vessel, it was intentionally made unstable. It rocked, groaned, and swayed constantly, often to the point of nausea. The crew's support barge, nicknamed the bigger boat, was never close enough when they needed it. That running complaint, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," became a bitter joke on set. Scheider later turned it into the film's most iconic line. In the evenings, tempers flared, actors bickered, crew members quit. Spielberg isolated himself in a tiny trailer, terrified the film would never be finished. Roy Scheider, Richard Drifus, and Robert Shaw barely spoke off camera. And when they did, it was usually through clenched teeth. But in front of the camera, Scheider was steady, solid. The lighthouse in the storm. He didn't need to be loud. He just needed to be real. And that quiet realism, his exhaustion, his dread, his desperate need to protect, gave Jaws something no monster movie had ever had before: heart. It's one of the most iconic lines in movie history. But "you're gonna need a bigger boat" wasn't in the script. It was born from the chaos and irritation that plagued the production of Jaws. The phrase began as an inside joke among the cast and crew. During the shoot, the production support barge, where the equipment, catering, and bathrooms were, was almost always too far away. Whenever something went wrong, and something always went wrong, someone would mutter sarcastically, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." It became a refrain, a coded way of expressing just how ill-prepared they were for what this film had become. Roy Scheider, who quietly absorbed the madness around him, saw the line's potential. One day, while filming the moment Brody first sees the shark surface, Scheider decided to try it. The timing was perfect. His delivery, deadpan, stunned, utterly authentic, landed like lightning. Spielberg kept it. No one questioned it. That one improvised line encapsulated the fear, disbelief, and humor of the entire film. It wasn't just Brody talking, it was everyone on that doomed boat. It was the audience, it was the crew, it was Spielberg. Everyone knew they were in over their heads. Scheider's performance in that scene became a cultural touchstone. It wasn't big or dramatic. It was real. The way his body recoils, the way he backs into the cabin, the stunned whisper. It all worked because it wasn't acting. It was reaction. It was human. And yet, it almost never happened. In a more controlled shoot, a more rigid production, that kind of spontaneity would have been shut down. But Jaws wasn't controlled. It was a floating circus. And in that chaos, Roy Scheider delivered a line that would define the film and his career forever. While the shark malfunctioned and the sea raged, another storm was brewing. One between Jaws co-stars Robert Shaw and Richard Drifus. Their on-set feud was legendary. What started as friendly ribbing soon turned into full-blown hostility. And stuck in the middle, Roy Scheider, trying to hold the film together. Shaw, a classically trained British actor and an intimidating presence, was also battling alcoholism. He would show up to set drunk, lash out during takes, and bully Drifus between scenes. He saw the younger actor as cocky and inexperienced, made sure he knew it. Drifus, for his part, gave it back. He mocked Shaw's theatrics, challenged his authority, and refused to back down. It was volatile, dangerous even. One day, Shaw dared Drifus to climb to the top of the boat's mast and jump. When Drifus hesitated, Shaw shoved his drink off the boat and sneered, "Then you don't have the stuff." The crew was stunned. Spielberg was frustrated, and Scheider, quiet, focused, professional, became the calming center. He never took sides, never raised his voice. Instead, he focused on the work. He knew that Brody, the character, was the glue holding the story together. And in many ways, Scheider did the same for the film itself. When Shaw and Drifus spiraled, Scheider kept it grounded. But the tension bled into the performances, and somehow, it worked. The strained dynamic between Quint, Hooper, and Brody felt authentic because it was. Their interactions crackled with real resentment. When Brody snapped at Hooper or bristled at Quint's bravado, it wasn't just acting, it was release. Spielberg later said that the actors' off-screen animosity helped shape the trio's on-screen chemistry. It gave Jaws an unpredictable edge, a feeling that at any moment, the crew might implode, even without the shark. And through it all, Roy Scheider remained steady, a rock in the chaos, just like Chief Brody. Amid malfunctioning sharks, raging egos, and an ocean that refused to cooperate, Roy Scheider became something Spielberg hadn't expected, the emotional center of Jaws. While Robert Shaw roared and Drifus quipped, Scheider did something harder. He made fear look real. Chief Brody wasn't a hero. He was a man out of his element, a city cop, afraid of water, trying to protect his family. In a lesser actor's hands, Brody could have been forgettable, but Scheider brought nuance. You could see the worry behind his eyes, the exhaustion in his shoulders, the frustration in his breath. He didn't need a monologue. His silence said it all. He was also deeply involved in the filmmaking. Scheider had a habit of staying on set even when he wasn't needed. He studied the camera angles. He worked with the crew. He cared. One of his greatest scenes, the quiet dinner moment with his son, was nearly cut. Spielberg had shot it quickly, not thinking much of it. But when he reviewed the footage, he was struck by how human it felt. No sharks, no blood. Just a father mimicking his child at the dinner table, searching for comfort in the middle of chaos. It became one of the most loved scenes in the film. That was Scheider's gift. He didn't play the monster. He played the man. And in doing so, he grounded the film in reality. With every look, every line, every hesitation, he reminded audiences that Jaws wasn't just about fear. It was about courage, in the face of it. Spielberg once said, "Without Roy, Jaws would have lost its soul." And watching the film today, it's easy to see why. While others were bigger or louder, Scheider was truer. He didn't just survive the shark. He made us believe in the man who did. Jaws may have terrified audiences in theaters, but during filming, the real danger wasn't the shark. It was the ocean itself. From the beginning, Spielberg's insistence on filming in open water introduced a level of unpredictability no Hollywood crew was prepared for. Waves ruined takes. Boats drifted out of frame mid-shot. Equipment sank. Actors were tossed around by the tide like props. The peaceful, scenic waters off Martha's Vineyard became a battleground. One of the most harrowing sequences involved the film's underwater cage scene, where Hooper, played by Drifus, dives into the ocean to face the great white. For realism, the production used a real shark for certain shots. But Drifus didn't perform those stunts. Instead, a much smaller stunt, double-named Carl Rizzo, was used, filmed inside a specially built cage to make the real shark appear even larger. During one terrifying take, the shark attacked the cage with such ferocity that it tore the structure apart, narrowly missing the stuntman inside. The footage was so authentic, Spielberg rewrote the script to have Hooper survive by hiding on the seafloor rather than being killed. And the dangers didn't stop there. During a key scene where a fisherman finds a severed head in a sunken boat, the actor was nearly injured when a malfunction caused the prosthetic to shoot out with such force it struck him in the face. Several crew members were cut by equipment or burned by malfunctioning lights. Cameramen were tethered to the boat to prevent them from falling overboard. A hydraulic rig failed during a shot of the Orca rocking violently, nearly tossing Roy Scheider into the sea. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. Crew morale plummeted. Safety standards were constantly being rewritten, but there was no turning back. Spielberg later admitted, "We were one wave away from catastrophe at all times." Jaws wasn't just a film production. It was survival. And no one knew that better than Roy Scheider, who saw firsthand how close fiction and reality came to colliding, beneath a very real, very dangerous sea. By the end of filming, the cast and crew of Jaws weren't just exhausted, they were convinced the movie was going to fail. The production had gone more than 100 days over schedule. The budget had ballooned from $4 million to $9 million. The shark barely worked. The ocean had nearly killed people. Spielberg himself believed his career was over before it had really begun. But what no one could see from the deck of the Orca was what the audience would see: a masterpiece. When Jaws opened on June 20th, 1975, lines stretched around the block. Theaters were packed. Word spread like wildfire. The public wasn't deterred by the stories of malfunctioning sharks and on-set disaster. They were hooked by the fear, the tension, the simplicity. Jaws wasn't just a hit. It was a phenomenon. The film grossed over $470 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time at that point. It invented the summer blockbuster. It changed the way studios released films, launching a new era of wide releases and saturation marketing. It was the birth of modern blockbuster cinema. And at the heart of it all was Roy Scheider. While critics praised Spielberg's direction and John Williams' haunting score, it was Scheider's grounded human performance that audiences clung to. He wasn't a superhero. He was a father, a husband, a cop who didn't belong on the water. And because he wasn't fearless, the audience didn't have to be either. His fear was our fear. His victory, our relief. Years later, when asked how he felt about the film's success, Scheider gave a characteristically modest answer: "I just tried not to fall off the boat." But what he delivered was more than stability. He gave the film its soul. And as the box office records shattered and Spielberg was crowned Hollywood's new golden boy, Roy Scheider quietly became one of the most respected actors of his generation. The man who faced the shark and made us all believe we could survive it. After Jaws, Roy Scheider became a reluctant icon. He reprised his role as Chief Brody in Jaws 2, 1978. But by the third film, which he refused to appear in, he had moved on. Scheider never wanted to be trapped by one role, even one as iconic as Brody. He pursued complex characters in films like All That Jazz, Blue Thunder, and The Russia House, earning continued praise for his quiet power and magnetic presence. But no matter what he did, Jaws followed him. He often joked that people would shout, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," at him in the grocery store. He was gracious about it, but also frustrated. He had done Shakespeare, danced in musicals, won awards, and yet he'd always be the man who killed the shark. In his later years, Scheider stepped away from the limelight. He battled multiple myeloma, a rare cancer, for several years. He passed away on February 10, 2008, at the age of 75. The tributes poured in, from fans, filmmakers, and fellow actors. Spielberg called him the quiet force that made Jaws believable. Richard Dreyfuss said, he was the conscience of that film. What made Roy Scheider special wasn't flash or bravado. It was honesty. In an industry that thrives on spectacle, he gave us substance. While others delivered the thrills, he gave us a reason to care. Chief Brody wasn't brave because he wanted to be. He was brave because he had to be. And in that quiet determination, Roy Scheider became unforgettable. Today, when people revisit Jaws, they remember the music, the shark, the suspense. But what lingers most is that moment on the deck. A man, a cigarette, and a line he wasn't supposed to say. You're gonna need a bigger boat.